So you want to play Everquest in 2023, but you're not really sure how the the game works.
Everquest, the legendary online game that started a phenomenon.
That's what these videos are for. They are a beginner guide for how to play Everquest. And I invite you, if you are a veteran of the game, to please include your tips down below. Try to keep them kind of in subject with the video, but include your tips for new players or returning players that may have kind of like lapsed in some of the knowledge of the game. We're going to be talking about the perspective of a new progression server. So think in the terms of like classic Everquest, Kunark, Velius, through Planes of Power, those kind of things. We don't want to overwhelm new players, right? We want new players. I want new players to Everquest. I want that game to grow. Today we're going to delve into a couple different topics that are all very important to Everquest. Combat roles, death penalties, which I am intimately familiar with in that game, leveling, and gear. We'll start with combat roles. Everquest follows what is lightly referred to as the Quaternity. It's like the Holy Trinity from the MMOs you may already know, like World of Warcraft, but with a fourth pillar. It's not that the role doesn't exist in other MMOs, just that in Everquest it's a very prominent and often essential role. The fourth role is the CC or support role. Now let's briefly go over what each role is expected to do in groups so that you can have some idea of what will be expected of you when you join that first group. The first role is known to anyone who has played an MMO with the Holy Trinity. The tank. It is a meat shield, the one taking the hits from all the mobs. This takes significant importance in Everquest both for survivability and because it is absolutely essential to keep the more dangerous mobs from the soft, fragile innards of your DPS and healers. A good tank can make or break a group or raid. In a group setting, you'll usually settle for one tank, though it's possible for less optimized groups to add in a second. Tanks can often double as pullers and or leaders of the group as well. Their role on raids will be similar for the most part, taking the hits so other people don't have to. But there will be unique cases where certain tanks take on different roles, like aggro builders, pullers, and even healers. Some tanks will provide supplementary DPS, while others will slot into tank rotations for raid trash. And of course, the big bad. Tanks are really not for the faint of heart on raids. Watching your health bar drop to near zero and then be completely refilled multiple times every couple seconds it's really terrifying. On progression servers, tanks will probably be the second or third most rare of the four roles, so finding groups and a guild for raid with is probably going to be pretty easy for you. Tank classes are the Warrior, Paladin, and Shadow Knight. Warriors are your primary tank, while the Paladin and Shadow Knight are just fine in groups and offer interesting utility on raids. But a tank can only soak up so much damage before they succumb, and that's where the reason for your wipe comes in. The healer. Healers in Everquest are basically essential to any group and doubly so for raids. As the old adage goes, you can never have too many healers. Well, I guess except if you have a group of like 6 healers, that might slow things down a bit. I mean, it's technically possible, but regardless, healers will be in demand. Each healer will have their own benefits and negatives, but it's important to note that only one will be able to res in combat, the cleric, with the others gaining out of combat reses at higher levels or non-XP AA reses much later. Healers will also provide important buffs, some to HP, some to AC, some to stats, and some will even have haste buffs to make your attacks faster. Some will even have important debuffs like slowing the NPC or adding a buff that heals everyone that hits it. So you'll be doing more than just healing that main tank and the really frustrating wizard that just keeps pulling aggro. Hell, one of the healers will even be able to port you to a different zone, which is really important early on and doesn't matter later. But the healing is still going to be the most important thing. On raids, you will have main healers focused on healing the primary tank, as well as group healers who are tasked with keeping the groups alive. Even the ones standing in the fire. Especially the ones standing in the fire, because we all know that they do the absolute best DPS. There's like a damage bonus boost there. Usually the healers will be the most rare on progression servers and always in demand, but your class choices with healers will be very important. In short, and I'll elaborate more on a dedicated video, but the primary healer is the cleric. Primary debuffer and solid heals, especially over time, is the shaman, and the class that's kind of left out of the loop but at least gets ports is the druid. And hey, the druid can solo and they have impressive damage over time spells, plus they get a meme pet at level 55. Now this next one is essentially a role that's in every single game you've ever played, whether it is a do-it-all kind of MMO or one that has the Holy Trinity. And it is also the role that probably most of you have played. It's the role that I have played a ton, DPS. We're also the role that has the least to do. We have one thing that we need to do, and sometimes we do it well and sometimes we don't. And that's just kill things. DPS is straightforward. You put the pointy end of your weapons in the soft parts of your enemy or fling fireballs at them. DPS classes all roughly do the same thing in different ways, doling out impressive amounts of damage. The best DPS class will change a lot through your time in EverQuest as well, with them rotating around with balance changes and with the different expansions. With DPS, your role as a group is going to be the same as in a raid. Kill stuff. Like I said, DPS are simple, not a lot to it, just kill stuff. The simplicity of the DPS's role and the thrill of destroying things quickly leads to DPS to be the most common on any given server, including progression server. However, the group utility and soloability of these classes will vary a lot, so some further research on specific classes will probably be needed. There are more slots than any other of the roles for a group or a raid for a DPS, but like I was saying, these are probably going to be the most popular class, so just keep that in mind. DPS classes in no particular order include the Ranger, Rogue, Monk, Wizard, Mage, Necromancer, Berserker after Omens of War, and the Beast Lord after Lucklin. But now we get to the most unique role in EverQuest, and the one that's going to be very mad at the DPS every single time they break mez, the CC and support. And again, this is not because the role doesn't exist in other games, as many World of Warcraft players will point out the abundance of CC across many classes, from stuns to ice traps. This is more about how important this role is. In EverQuest, individual encounters with NPCs can be dangerous, and it's very easy to accidentally pull too many mobs, get caught by a respawn, or accidentally run into the path of a roamer. Hell, most of the mobs in EverQuest run at low health. Many a group has died because they didn't lock down that annoying little froglock as it waddled its way to find some friends to avenge itself. Enter the CC, who can lock down mobs for long periods of time, multiple mobs at a time as well. But it's not just controlling the additional adds that will be beneficial. These classes also offer unique buffs and debuffs, specifically for mana regeneration and slowing and reducing the damage of incoming creatures. They offer many other helpful benefits that may or may not cross over with other classes. In raids, these CC classes are doubly essential for the same reasons as a group, but with the additional need at times to counter raid targets that have multiple adds. The two primary CC classes are the Enchanter and the Bard. The Enchanter gets the edge early for the CC role because they have longer duration mez spells and they can lock multiple mobs in place at once, stronger buffs, and of course, Charm. And Charm will be a very, very powerful skill early on in the game. The ability to charm and haste a mob, making its attacks hit faster, will make it into a tremendous DPS boon for the party, but also potentially break charm and murder your enchanter and then the entire group. Bards, on the other hand, are additive to every group unless there is another bard. They are the ultimate support rather than just CC, though they do perform admirably at CC. They're buff stacked with just about everything. They're fantastic pullers eventually, and they're just a lot of fun. Bards will be one of the most active classes you play early on, as you need to go through different songs all the time. This isn't like EverQuest used to be, however, and you will have the ability to set up melodies to run through some certain songs. But what happens when the mez breaks? What happens when the DPS just pulls too much aggro? What happens when the healer runs out of mana? Or when the tank is undergeared or watching too much Netflix? Well, in EverQuest, it kinda sucks. By design. EverQuest doesn't have as strict of a death penalty as it once did. You used to lose your body and leave all your gear on it on death, and you would have to go recover it, in addition to losing a chunk of your experience. Now you will no longer lose your body or gear, removing the need to go back and get it. However, you will still lose experience, and it can only be regained through the res from one of the healers, who has to go and res it off your body. Generally a cleric in the beginning, though paladins, shamans, and druids will eventually get experience reses. The amount of experience you lose on death is significant. However, there is currently a perk you can pay extra for that'll prevent you from losing your levels. Yes, you did hear that correctly. In EverQuest, dying has a steep enough penalty that you can, and honestly will, lose your levels. There are tales of incredible death loops and de-leveling characters to the extreme, but hey, at least you can't go below level 6 now. And speaking of leveling is going to be slower than most of the games you've played. Just kind of go into it expecting that. Like the death penalty, Everquest is more merciful now than it used to be, but it will still take time. Even if you utilize the various in-store purchases like potions and perks for experience gains, and log into every bonus experience event, which generally happen on holidays and the anniversary of the game, it will still take time. Be prepared for that, and as a new player of Everquest, try to enjoy it. For those of us who have played for years, even decades, the journey may not have the same luster it once did, and we're looking towards the end game. But for someone new, the journey is something wholly interesting and exciting to experience. Try not to get so caught up in the race towards endgame that you miss out on the experience that so many of us truly enjoyed when we first played Everquest. Leveling and finding new places, going new places, and getting to talk and experience it with your friends. The slow leveling is by design, partially so that you can socialize. Classic Everquest will take you from level 1 to 50, with subsequent expansions adding levels or alternate advancement. Most expansions will add about 5 to 10 levels, or a swath of new alternate advancement abilities to pick and choose from, which are essentially ways to buff up your class roll and get new and exciting abilities. It will be a hallmark of the game that you continue to do as you progress. Now, our last thing that we're going to talk about is gear, because this is the other form of progression in Everquest, and it is a very vertical progression. What would an RPG of any sort be without gear? Everquest is no different, with gear being incredibly important. You have 19 slots to fill. 19! This grows to 20 later when they add the charm slot, so there's a lot to gather up. But there's more to it to that in Everquest, at least early on. Items take on almost legendary status. Talk to anyone who played Everquest in its heyday and they'll speak of the legends of the flowing black silk sash and the golden Afridi builds. Scarcity of items and the uniqueness of them early in Everquest make them known and important. They give items a reason. This changes a bit as the game progresses, as loot is kind of thrown at you later on. Some classes will be more gear dependent than others. Tanks, for example, are extremely gear dependent, while others like the caster DPS will be less gear dependent, but have other dependencies such as spells. Early in, and honestly for several expansions, rare spells may be hard to come by at first. They come from either group drops or even at later points, raid drops. This is just something to keep in mind, as gearing for this game and getting their spells is very important to maximizing your potential for your class. It will also be very rewarding. That is my overview of some of the basic points of Everquest, some of the basic gameplay points. Again, if you are a fan of Everquest, if you played the game, please leave some helpful tips down below for players that may be trying it for the first time. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.